The year is 1600, a bitter February morning in Rome's Campo de Fiori. Through the pre-dawn mist, a crowd gathers, their breath visible in the winter air. At the centre of the square stands a wooden stake surrounded by a bundle of sticks. They're waiting for a man, a former Dominican friar, a philosopher, a wandering scholar whose ideas would shake the very foundations of 16th century thought and beyond. His name is Giordano Bruno, and in a few hours, he will burn. To understand how a man of God became branded as a heretic, as an atheist no less, in an age where such labels were death sentences, we need to travel back 4 decades to a small town near Naples where a boy named Filippo Bruno first opened his eyes to a universe far vaster than anyone around him could imagine. The Naples of 1548 was a city of contradictions. While the Renaissance had sparked an explosion of art, science, and philosophical inquiry across modern-day Italy, the shadow of the Roman Inquisition loomed ever larger. The Church, reeling from the Protestant Reformation, had begun to tighten its grip on what could be thought, what could be said, and most dangerously, what could be believed. Young Filippo, who would later take the name Giordano upon entering the Dominican order, grew up in this pressure cooker of competing ideas. But while his contemporaries learned to keep their more dangerous thoughts to themselves, Bruno developed a peculiar and fatal habit. He simply couldn't stop asking questions. Why, he would later convey, should we accept the limits of our minds when the universe itself has no limits? It's a statement that perfectly encapsulates both Bruno's brilliant insight and his tragic flaw. In an age where the Church insisted that the Earth was the centre of a finite universe, with a literal heaven above and a hell below, Bruno dared to imagine something far more radical, an infinite cosmos teeming with countless worlds, perhaps even other forms of life. These weren't just astronomical speculations, they were philosophical dynamite. But here's where our story takes its first crucial turn. Bruno wasn't actually an atheist, at least not in any way that we'd recognise today. In fact, his vision of an infinite universe was deeply spiritual. He saw it as a reflection of an infinite God. The problem was that his God looked nothing like the one approved by the Catholic Church. To understand why this distinction would eventually cost him his life, we need to grasp something fundamental about 16th century Europe. The accusation of atheism wasn't really about denying God's existence. Instead, it was a loaded term, a weapon wielded against anyone who challenged the Church's monopoly on defining what God was. As Bruno himself would discover, in a world where religious and political power were intrinsically intertwined, having the wrong kind of faith could be just as dangerous as having no faith at all. In the end, this isn't just a story about a man burned for his beliefs. It's about the price of asking questions in an age of answers, about the fine line between heresy and revelation, and about how the label atheist became a tool for silencing those who dared to think differently. Like many of you, I've watched with concern as findable, reliable, objective news has become increasingly challenging.
You are fake news.
Social media algorithms prioritize sensational headlines that generate clicks, sacrificing depth and nuance. This is precisely why ground news has become an indispensable tool in my daily routine. It enables me, you, to analyze multiple sources covering the same story, examining their bias, credibility, and ownership patterns. In a world where it's easy to get stuck in an echo chamber, ground news provides a way out. You can check them out at ground.news/rationality. Let me demonstrate its value with a recent example: Brazil's temporary suspension of X. Big story. Well, with Ground News, I can instantly pull over 400 articles from around the globe to see that over 60% of them are rated highly factual, a rating indicative of how subjective the reporting is likely to be. Looking closer at how different outlets cover the story, I can see how each is titling and spinning the narrative. While some sources focused on speculating about Elon Musk's response to the ban, others provided straightforward reporting on the Brazilian Supreme Court's direct order. This comprehensive feature is invaluable. It helps you maintain perspective on the full scope of any story near instantly, not just a single viewpoint. In an increasingly polarized world, this balanced approach to news consumption has never been more essential. Ground News is giving my viewers 50% off their unlimited access Vantage plan. This is the best deal of the year, and it will only be available for a limited time. Experience it for yourself at ground.news/rationality. If you value balanced, reliable news coverage, I'm confident that you'll find this tool as indispensable as I have. It's thanks to Ground News that I can keep making projects like this, and so if you do sign up, you'll be helping out the channel as well. Thank you. Picture a young man in a Dominican habit, moving silently through the corridors of the monastery of San Domenico Maggiore. The year is 1565, and these ancient walls hold both knowledge and danger. Hidden in a latrine lie books that could destroy him, works by Erasmus banned by the church. But young Giordano can't help himself. His hunger for knowledge has always been stronger than his fear. The transformation of Filippo Bruno to Fra Giordano wasn't just a change of name. It was his first step into a world of paradoxes. The Dominicans were known as the Dogs of the Lord, zealous defenders of Catholic orthodoxy. Yet, they were also among Europe's greatest scholars. Bruno had entered their ranks at 17, seeking not just God, but understanding. San Domenico Maggiore was no ordinary monastery. Its library was vast, its intellectual tradition formidable. Thomas Aquinas himself had studied within these walls. But while his predecessors used their learning to fortify Catholic doctrine, Bruno would use his to tear holes in it. Through his actions, he would express, "I learned more from those forbidden books than from all the approved texts they forced upon us." It's a telling admission, one that reveals both his intellectual courage and his fatal inability to play by the rules. But here's where Bruno's life takes a dramatic swerve. While quietly devouring heterodox, that is non-orthodox texts, Bruno was also excelling in traditional studies. He had a gift for memory, developing techniques that would later make him famous in Europe's courts. This combination, orthodox excellence and heterodox curiosity, created a peculiar blind spot in his superiors. They saw his brilliance, but they missed the rebellion brewing beneath it. Until, that is, he began asking questions about transubstantiation. Picture the monastery's dining hall in 1576, dozens of Dominican brothers eating in mandated silence. Then Bruno's voice cuts through the quiet. If the bread literally becomes Christ's body, he asks, why do we still call it the host? It seems almost innocent to our modern ears, but in 16th century Italy, questioning transubstantiation, the literal transformation of communion bread and wine into Christ's body and blood, wasn't just theological speculation, it was the kind of question that got people killed. What's fascinating is that Bruno wasn't denying God's presence in the Eucharist. Rather, like many of his ideas, he was suggesting something more complex, that divine truth might be more subtle than literal interpretation allowed. But subtlety, in an age of absolutism, was often indistinguishable from heresy. The reaction was swift. Within days, Bruno learned that he was to face an inquiry. The charge would be challenging Catholic doctrine and other forms of heresy. It would be the first of many such charges. What happened next reveals much about both Bruno's character and the dangerous game he was playing. Rather than face the inquiry, he fled. He stripped off his Dominican habit, packed a few precious books, and slipped away in the night. It was the beginning of a 15-year odyssey that would take him all across Europe, from Geneva to Paris, London to Prague. But here's the bitter irony. In running away from that first accusation, Bruno set in motion a chain of events that would eventually lead to far graver charges. Because now he wasn't just a friar with dangerous questions, he was an apostate, a fugitive from religious authority. Yet something often overlooked in Bruno's story emerges here. His departure from the Dominican order wasn't just an escape from persecution, it was a philosophical declaration. In choosing exile over submission, he was embodying a radical idea, that the pursuit of truth might require breaking free from institutional religion entirely. This didn't make him an atheist in the modern sense, but it did make him something perhaps even more threatening to the established order. A man who claimed the right to seek God on his own terms. And as we'll see in what follows, the very qualities that made Bruno brilliant, his uncompromising pursuit of truth, his inability to keep quiet, his talent for making powerful enemies, would ultimately lead back to Italy, back to the Inquisition, and finally to that fateful morning in Rome's Campo de' Fiori. In Geneva, 1579, a man in plain clothes slips into a Protestant church, hoping to find refuge among Calvin's followers. The irony is palpable, a former Catholic friar seeking sanctuary among Rome's greatest enemies. But Giordano Bruno is about to learn a harsh lesson. When it comes to religious tolerance, the Protestant Reformation hasn't changed as much as he hoped. Bruno's years of wandering represents one of history's greatest intellectual odysseys, but they're also a masterclass in how not to survive in 16th century Europe. While most religious refugees learned to keep their head down, Bruno developed an almost pathological habit of engaging in philosophical warfare with everyone he met, Catholic, Protestant, and Calvinist alike. In Geneva, it took him less than 3 months to get himself excommunicated from the Calvinist church. His crime? Pointing out 20 errors in a distinguished professor's lecture, netting him 2 weeks in jail. The Calvinists, it turned out, were just as fond of orthodoxy as the Catholics he'd fled. But rather than being discouraged by rejection, he seemed to draw energy from it. Each confrontation refined his ideas, pushed him further from conventional thought. Next stop, Paris, 1581. He's no longer the fugitive friar, but a rising intellectual star. His memory techniques have caught the attention of King Henry III. In a French court, Bruno finally finds what he's been seeking, an audience for his ideas. Yet even here, at the height of his worldly success, Bruno couldn't help but court controversy. In private lectures to the king, he began developing his most dangerous idea yet, that the universe was infinite, containing countless worlds, and that the Earth's sun was just one star among many. This might sound like astronomy to modern ears, but in 16th century Central Europe, it was heresy. If the universe is infinite, where, then, is heaven? If there are other worlds, are humans truly unique in God's plan? The implications were staggering, and to many, terrifying. Your fear of infinity, Bruno would tell his critics, betrays the poverty of your thoughts. Fast forward to England, 1583. Bruno now resides in Oxford, prepared to defend his cosmic theories. The scene is almost comedic. The Italian philosopher gesturing wildly, describing infinite worlds to an audience of English academics who still can't decide if he's brilliant or mad. It was here, in England, that Bruno produced his most important works, including On the Infinite Universe and Worlds. But it was also here that the accusations of atheism began to take their most serious form. Because Bruno wasn't just challenging the church's cosmology, he was proposing a completely new way of thinking about God and humanity's place in the universe. In his vision, God wasn't the bearded figure sitting above the clouds, but an infinite force pervading an infinite universe. The stars weren't just lights in the firmament, but suns like ours, potentially surrounded by inhabited worlds. Most radically, he suggested that divinity might not be found in religious doctrine, but in the direct contemplation of nature. To his enemies, this radical insight was far more dangerous than simply disbelief. Bruno was proposing a God so vast, so different to the church's teachings, that it threatened to make traditional religion obsolete. Finding himself in Prague, 1588, Bruno presents his ideas to the Emperor Rudolf II, another patron of the occult and scientific knowledge. But even here, in one of Europe's most tolerant courts, he can sense the noose tightening. The Inquisition's reach is growing longer, and his reputation precedes him everywhere. What's remarkable about this period is how Bruno seems to accelerate rather than moderate his provocations. In his travels, he would soon declare that Christ was a skilled magician rather than the Son of God. Yeah, that would do it. In Frankfurt, he would publish works that explicitly challenged Catholic doctrine. It's as if, having glimpsed an infinite universe, he could no longer bear the confines of 16th century thought. Time is the father of truth. Experience is its mother. In 1591, he made what would prove to be a fatal decision, accepting an invitation from Giovanni Mocenico, a young Venetian nobleman. The Venetian Republic, though more independent and historically more tolerant than other states in the Italian peninsula, was not immune to the growing power of the Roman Inquisition. Venice, 1592. In a palace on the Grand Canal, Giordano Bruno settles into his new role as a tutor to Giovanni Mocenico, scion of one of Venice's most powerful families. The city's famous carnival masks are everywhere, but Bruno fails to recognize the most dangerous mask of all, that of his patron's apparent friendship. The relationship between Bruno and Mocenico perfectly captures the dangerous game of patronage and betrayal in late 16th century Europe. Mocenico had written to Bruno claiming to seek instruction in the art of memory and the philosopher's magical secrets. Bruno, perhaps grown overconfident from his years in more tolerant courts, accepted the invitation. It was a fatal mistake. What Bruno couldn't know, was that Mocenico had already been in contact with the Inquisition. His young patron was not just a student, but an informant, carefully documenting every heterodox statement, every challenging idea, every whisper about Catholic doctrine. Late at night, May 22nd, 1592, servants burst into Bruno's quarters in the Mocenico Palace. As they drag him from his bed, his former student watches from the doorway. The next morning, Bruno finds himself in the cells of the Venetian Inquisition. The transcripts of Bruno's Venetian interrogations survive, giving us a glimpse into what happened next. The questions came rapid fire. Did he deny the Trinity? Did he call Christ a skilled magician? Did he claim the universe was infinite? Did he believe in reincarnation? Bruno's responses reveal a man trying to walk an impossible line. He admitted to philosophical speculation, but insisted he had always maintained Catholic faith. He acknowledged his doubts, but argued they were matters of philosophy, not theology. But here's the fascinating part. Even in chains, even facing the possibility of death, Bruno couldn't help himself. When questioned about his cosmic theories, he launched into passionate defenses of his ideas about infinite worlds and countless suns. The transcripts show his interrogators repeatedly trying to steer him back to theological matters, while Bruno insists on explaining his philosophy. The Venetian phase of Bruno's trial might have ended differently. Venice, proud of its independence, was often reluctant to hand prisoners over to Rome, the seat of Catholic power. For 8 months, a diplomatic battle raged. The Roman Inquisition demanded Bruno's extradition, but Venice hesitated. In the pre-dawn darkness of January 1593, a small boat slips away from Venice. Inside, chained and guarded, sits Giordano Bruno. Rome has won the diplomatic battle, and Bruno is about to face the full power of the Roman Inquisition. What followed was 7 years of imprisonment and interrogation. 7 years in which Bruno faced increasing pressure to recant not just his astronomical theories, but his entire philosophical worldview. The full records of the Roman trial are lost, but we know the final charges. Bruno was accused not just of heresy, but of something the Inquisition saw as far worse: an attempt to create a new religion. His infinite universe, his questioning of Catholic doctrine, his philosophical speculations, all of it added up, in the Inquisition's eyes, to a comprehensive attack on Christianity itself. On January 20, 1600, Pope Clement VIII ordered that Bruno be sentenced as an impenitent heretic. When the sentence was read, Bruno reportedly told his judges, Perhaps you pronounce this sentence against me with greater fear than I receive it. And now we return to where our story began. That February morning in Campo de Fiori, Bruno is led to the stake, stripped naked, his tongue clamped with an iron gag to prevent him from addressing the crowd. It's impossible to fathom the thoughts that raced through Bruno's mind as he faced the bloodthirsty mob, knowing the agony that awaited him. Yet through it all, he embodied courage. As the flames rise, as the crowd cheers his immolation, he turns his face away from the crucifix shoved in his face for the last time. Today, in Rome's Campo de Fiori, Giordano Bruno gazes down on the market stalls and cafes, a bronze sentinel at the very spot he was burned. Each year, on the anniversary of his death, free thinkers gather here to lay wreaths at his feet. The bitter irony is that Bruno's execution, intended to silence his ideas forever, achieved precisely the opposite. In death, he became something he was never in life, a symbol. To philosophers, scientists, and free thinkers across Europe, the news of his burning sent a clear message about the price of intellectual freedom and the importance of protecting it. In space, there are countless constellations, suns, and planets. We see only the suns because they give light. The planets remain invisible, for they are too small and dark. There are also numberless Earths circling around their suns. As Bruno's physical form turned to ash in Rome, his ideas were already taking root in the fertile soil of European thought. The concept of an infinite universe, multiple worlds, and a god that transcended simple human understanding became instrumental ideas of the Enlightenment. The same imagination that the Inquisition saw as heresy became the foundation of our modern understanding of the universe. Step outside, look at the grand cosmos, see that every dot is a sun. Giordano Bruno figured that out, and the Catholic Church burnt him for it. And so ends the remarkable tale of Giordano Bruno, a story we're able to tell thanks to you, our loyal viewers who watch these videos through to the end, and especially those of you who serve as our backbone on Patreon. Speaking of support, Ground News continues to be a daily part of my routine, and their 50% off deal is still available at ground.news/rationality. Thank you all for helping us ensure that these crucial stories aren't forgotten.